The film begins by showing Curtis Craig, a ruthless gangster, relentlessly pursuing his fellow gang member Raymond, who has refused to pay for drugs supplied by Curtis. The high-stakes chase leads to both men firing guns at each other, completely unaware that a young child is recording their altercation with a camera. Tragically, one of their stray bullets hits the innocent child, leading to the immediate apprehension of Curtis and Raymond by the police. Meanwhile, Michael Mitchell, the grieving father of the young boy killed in the crossfire, struggles to come to terms with the devastating loss of his child. Overwhelmed with grief and sorrow, Michael turns to alcohol to cope with his pain. During their interrogation, Curtis and Raymond confidently claim that the child's death was not intentional and that the incident was a result of their heated chase. However, when the trial finally begins, Michael fervently hopes for justice for his son, despite the lack of witnesses to the actual shooting. In the end, Michael's hopes are dashed as the judge acquits Curtis and Raymond of murder due to a lack of evidence. The gangsters are only found guilty of their drug crimes, leaving Michael to come to terms with the fact that justice may never truly be served for his son's untimely death. Days after the trial, Michael continues to struggle with his anger and grief, spending countless nights drinking and lashing out at his wife, Robin. However, one night, Michael discovers the location of the prison where Curtis and Raymond are being held, sparking an idea in his mind. Consumed with revenge, he begins to hatch a plan to avenge his son's death. The following day, Curtis is escorted into his new cell, where he meets his cellmate, Clever. Clever quickly fills Curtis in on the dangerous dynamics of the prison, controlled by a thug named Eddie. Eddie demands complete submission from all inmates and routinely bets on how long new prisoners will last in the harsh environment. In the unforgiving prison environment, where inmates are regularly killed to win bets placed by certain parties, Clever warns Curtis to stay alert and avoid becoming the next target. Clever himself acts as the bookmaker for these deadly bets, and he tells Curtis to be careful as he could easily become a victim. Meanwhile, Michael seeks advice from his friend Armand, who has recently been released from prison. Armand advises Michael to let go of his desire for revenge, telling him that it will never truly bring him peace. However, Michael's determination for vengeance has become all-consuming, and he refuses to let go of his quest for justice. Armand warns Michael that the prison he plans to enter is a place where compassion and forgiveness do not exist, and he advises Michael to leave all notions of mercy behind if he hopes to survive. To prepare for his mission, Michael learns how to fashion a gun out of everyday materials, determined to do whatever it takes to avenge his son's death. A few days later, Michael's plan to infiltrate the prison is finally put into action. He intentionally breaks traffic rules and attacks a police officer who comes to ticket him, allowing himself to be arrested and sent to the same prison where Curtis and Raymond are held. Inside the prison, Clever warns Curtis that he is in danger of being killed and gives him a stack of books to protect him from stabbings. Clever has placed a bet on Curtis winning a fight, and he advises him to kill Raymond as quickly as possible so that the fight will end. Curtis takes Clever's advice and attacks Raymond in the shower, leading to a brutal fight between the two. However, Raymond had come prepared with a sharp object, which he uses to stab Curtis in the stomach. Luckily, the stack of books provided by Clever provides some protection, and Curtis manages to survive the attack. In retaliation, Curtis stabs Raymond to death. The death of Raymond caused a stir among the guards and prison officials, who began to suspect foul play. The warden launched an investigation and interviewed several inmates, but no one was willing to talk. Meanwhile, Clever was basking in his success, having made a fortune from the bet between Curtis and Raymond. He gave Curtis a small cut of the winnings as a token of gratitude for following his advice. During a visit from his wife Elise, Curtis received some devastating news. His drug money, which he had hoped would provide for his family while he was in prison, had been stolen by his mistress. Curtis was furious and felt betrayed by the one person he had trusted with his secret stash of cash. He had hoped that his time in prison would be a temporary setback, and that his family would be able to live comfortably with the money he had saved up. Now he was faced with the reality that his wife and children would struggle to get by without it. In the meantime, Eddie and his gang finally found out that Clever had been cheating in their bets, so they took matters into their own hands and brutally attacked him while he was on duty. Clever was left battered and bruised as a result. Meanwhile, Michael had just entered the prison and was talking with the prison psychology officer when he met his new cellmate, Torre Small. Torre immediately filled Michael in on the dangerous and volatile situation in the prison. Eddie, who had been keeping an eye on Michael, asked Torre to bring Michael to meet him. Eddie was intrigued by Michael's past, particularly the fact that he had intentionally injured a police officer to get himself into prison. Eddie invited Michael to join his gang, but also discovered that Michael's ultimate goal was to kill Curtis, the man who had killed his son. Despite their shared desire for revenge, Eddie told Michael that he and his gang already had the plan to torture Curtis and forbid Michael from taking action. Michael ultimately decided not to join Eddie's gang, choosing instead to pursue his own brand of justice. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the prison, a police inspector named Anthony visited his injured colleague, the officer that Michael had intentionally injured to get into prison. The injured police officer, David Teal, is now confined to a wheelchair as a result of Michael's actions. He asks Inspector Anthony for help in seeking revenge against Michael. Anthony, with little choice, agrees to assist his colleague. Meanwhile, Michael and Curtis run into each other in the prison bathroom. As they shower, Michael warns Curtis that he always sees his revenge through to the end. Curtis, unaware of Michael's intentions, tries to reason with him. He admits that he never intended to kill Michael's son and expresses his regret for the child's death. But Michael, consumed by his desire for revenge, remains silent and gives Curtis a menacing look, indicating his intention to kill him. Inside the medical room, Clever discovered a shard of glass and held onto it, planning his revenge against Eddie for the beating he received. As he was being treated, he smashed the glass into pieces, contemplating his next move. In the meantime, Curtis continued to instigate trouble with Eddie, daring him to a one-on-one fight. However, Eddie refused his invitation outright, refusing to engage in such reckless behavior. On the other hand, Michael met with Armand in secret to obtain bullets for the weapons he was preparing to use for his revenge. The two conducted their transaction through a covert exchange of shoes. Armand expressed his surprise that Michael would go to such lengths for revenge, but Michael merely replied with a biblical quote, "An eye for an eye." A few days later, Clever was declared recovered from his injuries and returned to work in the prison canteen. He saw this as an opportunity to take revenge on Eddie and put flakes of glass powder in his drink. After drinking the contaminated beverage, Eddie immediately felt a tremendous pain in his throat and started coughing up blood. The other inmates witnessed his agony and used it as an opportunity to cause chaos in the prison. During the ensuing chaos, Michael and Curtis attempted to kill each other, but the guards were able to break up the fight and put both men in solitary confinement. While in isolation, Curtis was haunted by memories of his wife and daughter and felt guilty for leaving them behind. However, he soon realized that his safety was also in jeopardy because Michael had been trained to kill him once he was released from solitary confinement. At the police station, Inspectors Anthony and David were discussing their plan to put a hired criminal into prison with the intention of having him kill Michael. David hoped that this criminal could get his revenge on Michael for having left him paralyzed. He even provided the criminal with a knife to use in the act. Meanwhile, at the prison, Curtis and Michael were released from solitary confinement and were visited by their wives. Curtis apologized to his wife, Elise, for not being able to fulfill his duties as a father while in prison. Elise hugged him and assured him that she and their child would wait for him for as long as it took. She also expressed her sadness over the news of Eddie's death and other inmates in the prison. However, Michael's wife had a different agenda. She came to visit him with the intention of divorcing him. She had met someone else who appreciated her more than Michael, and she was ready to move on from their marriage. When the night wore on, Curtis couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. He had heard rumors that Michael was planning to take his own life, and he knew he had to be ready for anything. So, when a warden who had been bribed by Michael showed up at his cell, Curtis was already on edge. He grabbed a knife just in case and followed the warden to the back room, where Michael was waiting for him. The two men began to fight, their years of training and experience evident in every move they made. Despite Michael's paralysis, he was still able to hold his own against Curtis, who was already an experienced fighter. But as the fight continued, it became clear that Michael simply didn't have the stamina to keep up with Curtis. Seeing an opportunity to end it all, Curtis raised his knife, ready to strike the killing blow. But at that moment, something changed in him. He realized that if he killed Michael, it would only invite more violence and revenge. After Curtis had decided not to kill Michael and instead carry him back to his cell, they were stopped by Inspector Anthony's men, who had received orders from David to kill Michael with the knife he had given to the criminal. Despite Curtis' attempts to protect Michael, he was stabbed and died in his arms. Curtis was devastated and felt responsible for Michael's death, even though he had tried to save him. 3 years later, Curtis was released from prison and reunited with his wife and son. They went on a pilgrimage to Michael's grave, and Curtis reflected on how meeting Michael had changed him. He realized the importance of living honestly and forgiving others, even in difficult circumstances. The film ends with Curtis finding closure and moving on with his life, carrying Michael's memory with him. The moral of the story is that don't bribe wardens or give knives to hitmen, but if you do, make sure to keep them away from each other, and don't forget to do some cardio before fighting.